What advice do you have on handling disrespectful parent behavior? Okay, so what are some things that help when a parent is being disrespectful? Disrespectful parents can be a really challenging thing to deal with. And, when I think of dealing with disrespectful parents, I think the first thing, though, that we have to do is kind of do an attitude check on our own spirit. Our identity can get tied up in what people think about us, or identity can also get tied up in, um, just the fact that we feel like we are a good teacher in our job. And when we're finding our self-worth in what people think of us and the fact that I'm a good teacher, when a parent then comes and is critical of that or not treating us like we think we deserve, it cannot just be like a problem we have to deal with, which we do, but it can become like a personal attack. It can feel like that. It can feel like my self-worth is being attacked, who I am is being attacked. So I think it's always helpful, and we kind of always need to go back to like God and remind ourselves like God has called me to this role. Like I am complete in Him. This is someone that He loves, whether a believer or not. Made in His image, God loves them. I'm called to serve my students and this parent, and I'm called to turn the other cheek, and I'm called to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit, and like all these things that we probably don't feel like doing in the moment. But just kind of going back to God and reminding us, like, God, clothe me in humility in this interaction. Help me to respond like you would respond. And then going from there. That doesn't mean that we just let the parent be completely disrespectful and like that's and just let them like walk all over us, right? Because it's important for us to come at it with the right attitude. But at the same time, we want to promote like a healthy working relationship with this parent, right? So I do think it should always start by, and this is hard, and it depends how disrespectful they're being, right? I mean, it depends if they're being rude and abrasive to you versus if they're just disagreeing with you. But I think that we do want to try to understand their heart. A lot of times parents will be upset and they might have misunderstood something, or they might have this concern. They think it clashes with what you did. And if we can get to understanding like the why behind their complaint, there's almost always a why behind it. And if we can kind of get to the, okay, um, why are you feeling like this? Or what is the concern that's underneath the concern? Because a lot of times there's that underneath concern, and then there's the actual issue, and then there's something that they care about underneath. And sometimes we disagree on this, but we agree on what actually matters. And then if you're able to get to that, you can kind of explain to the parent, well, actually, this is why I'm doing this, or this is the thing. Or you might say, oh, okay, I actually do understand, and we're actually going to change something, or whatever the case is. Um, Patty just said setting boundaries and good communication, like every interaction, it also helps to have an admin that has your back. Absolutely. And I think those boundaries are important too. A couple boundaries that come into mind off the top of my head, and then Becky, I'd love to hear any thoughts you have to add to this. A couple boundaries that come to my mind are um, like boundaries in your communication. So like with email. I hope that your parents don't expect that you get back to email within 10 minutes. You can set a boundary of I reply to all emails, you know, at 3 o'clock, or I reply within 24 hours, or something like that. So they're not expecting that. Also gives you time if you get an angry email to calm down, to like let it be, to seek advice, and not to like feel like you have to fire off a reply. So same thing, if there is a parent that you find is really like, it's not just like I had a bad interaction. It's like this is a really big problem. There are reasonable boundaries you can set. Like I'm only going to talk to you with an admin present. Like that might be necessary for a parent that's really abrasive. We need to have a third person here to help us have these conversations, or we can talk during these times, or we can use this form of communication. You might realize like this certain form is not good. We need to be in person, or we need to use the phone, or we need to use email, or whatever you think would work best. So those are a few things too. And then, yeah, if you have an admin that's even moderately supportive, getting them involved, looping them in at the least, letting them know, hey, I had this interaction. This is what happened. This is how I handled it. That can be really great because if that parent goes to the admin the admin has at least heard your side and knows what you're thinking and how you're handling it, and them having that knowledge will help them interact with the parent and also kind of know both sides, as it were. So those are a few things that came to my mind.
And
Becky, do you have any thoughts to add?
yeah, that admin one was actually one of the first ones that came to mind. Even if you don't have a supportive admin, looping them in, like Linda said, when an admin knows ahead of time about an issue that may or may not come their way, they are always grateful because they're human too. And so if you hear about a stressful issue from a parent and you don't have any pre-knowledge that this might be coming your way, your emotions can come and cloud your judgment, and you might be less supportive of that teacher than you intended to be or normally would be just because you're caught off guard, just because you were unprepared for it and you're drawn into the negative emotions of the parent. And so just cueing admin in on XYZ happened so that can really help them prepare themselves, understand what you feel happened and move forward from there. So I absolutely think just letting them know something happened is really, really vital. And similarly, from a parent side of things, we all know that the kid perspective is fairly biased in the kid direction. And so, if at all possible, if you have a negative interaction with a kid and you, especially if you are a little uncertain about your standing with that parent, um, and you at all can, getting on top of that story and being the first to explain from an adult perspective what happened, why XYZ consequence happened, what the kids said, what their interactions with you were after the fact, that can be really helpful. The parent might not believe you 100%, but if they hear from an adult first, again, when the kid comes and whines and complains about how unfair Mrs. Jones is later, they're going to have your voice in their head already and be able to accept that it's probably at least a mix of truths, if not mostly Mrs. Jones is right, most of the time. And so getting on top of that story before, again, parents are humans too, and they have an emotional reaction if their kid comes home and says something awful happened. They may believe them if they have no other evidence to do otherwise. And so giving them the evidence to say, yeah, XYZ awful happened, but here's the truth of the story of what that was can be really, really helpful in helping to frame and shape that conversation so it's productive and just trying to give parents positive feedback about their kids, even the really, really, really hard ones. But it is so hard for some parents who love their kids and it feels to them like all they ever hear is bad from a school. And that might be really hard for the school too, is more than likely the case. But it can still have a really difficult impact on a parent's heart, and their openness and their willingness to collaborate with the school can be hurt if they're never hearing positive. And so, working really hard to, even if it's after a disrespectful incident where somebody was really inappropriately responding to you and interacting with you, just trying incredibly hard to build up that quick positive engagement with the parents and say, your kid was awesome today because XYZ. And there's nothing, no other reason. You're not going into, but we struggled with blah. It's just a quick positive that can really, really help parents feel safer about who's watching their kids because they understand and recognize that you don't just see their kid as bad and you don't just see their kid as a problem, that you see and recognize that there might be problems that we need to work through, but that you love their kid and see them as a whole person and are looking out for what they do well, just like they are as the parent. And I think that can really help build relationship and trust between a teacher and a family.
I love that. That's such a good one. I forgot about that one. That's a fantastic suggestion. And Patty also gave one more idea in the comments. She said if previous teachers have had the same kid and thus the same parents, it can help
Mhm.
to see if they have any suggestions. So yeah, and you got to be careful about how you phrase that. You don't want to just get all the negative. But asking, hey, have you found anything that's worked well in, relating with these set of parents or whatever the case. I think that's so good.
And that actually brings to mind to me as well as a specialist, one family in particular that I adored came to mind. They had a little bit of a distrust toward school in general, but because I'd worked with their kids for years and years and years, and especially during the COVID era, like we would meet a lot and I'd really support them. And I met with the family, themselves, the adults, like we had developed a really strong relationship and they trusted me significantly. And so when the classroom teachers came up against some issues, trying to loop me in on those conversations, whether it be live or in email, and just have Mrs. Jones be part of that conversation helps give that sense of trust. So if there's whether it's a counselor, a principal, a specialist, whatever it is, if there's somebody at your school that seems to be able to get through to a really difficult parent more than others, whether it's because they have had the time and the history with them, or it's just personalities clicked better, whatever it is, having them be part of those difficult conversations can also be a helpful piece. And again, help build that trust in the system that some parents struggle with.